Good afternoon, CPAC family, for another action-packed edition of CPAC Live. If our government minders are to be believed, it's Wednesday, April the 29th. We're almost to that famous progressive holiday known as May Day. We would have been in Miami for CPAC Exile, but instead, we are all enjoying each other's company here. Let's bring on ACU Chairman Matt Schlapp. Matt, how are you this Wednesday?
Ian, I can't believe we're almost to May 1st. That is an amazing thing to think about.
Matt, I keep getting very worried watching millions and millions of Americans being added to the unemployment rolls. And people are beginning to write that the recovery on this thing is not going to be very quick because of the way that certain industries are evolving in these moments. Where's your head at with Americans who are finding themselves in increasingly desperate situations, and a lot of them at once?
I find myself in a strange position because I do have a lot of interaction with different types of companies around the country. And I would agree with what you just said, Ian. Actually, I don't think people are capturing the situation very well. I think it's much more dire than is being reported. I think the cable news channels are transfixed with panicky coverage of the Wuhan virus, of Chinese corona, whatever you like to call it. That's actually an important story. That should be less panicky. The coverage of that should be less panicky. We know more and more about the chemistry, the science, the biology of Chinese corona. And the good news is, there's a very, very high chance that even if you get it, which is, it seems to be, not everybody gets it, but the recovery rate is really high. And that goes to all these great first responders and healthcare professionals around the country and really around the world that are just being heroes right now. And we continue to keep everybody who's suffering in our prayers because it's a terrible thing when it hits your family. We all understand that. That being said, the coverage is overly panicky to the point where you have a lot of people in America saying, I don't want to leave my house, even when the president says it's all clear, or when your governor says we can do this safely and responsibly. But if you watched an hour or two of the coverage, Ian, of course you would feel that way. Oh my God, this thing, when you get it, all these people are dying and you'll probably die and you'll probably get it. Is it really a terrible way to approach dealing with this carefully and soberly and responsibly? But the other side of it is the economy. That should be getting panicky coverage right now. That's the coverage that isn't panicky, which should be appropriately, which is if we have the majority of the United States economy shut down for many more weeks or months, but I'd just say even weeks, I am not sure that we'll get out of this mess in shorter than a decade. It's going to take a long time for businesses to kind of put the puzzle back together on some of these complicated financial transactions that unfortunately, by a sense of timing, hit right during this outbreak of Chinese corona. So it's imperative that America do what so many of these countries are doing and so many American companies are doing. How many of you in your home, the doorbell rings and there's a package? Well, somebody delivered it. Somebody made the goods. Somebody drove the truck. Somebody you flew the plane. There's a way to do this in a way that reduces our chance and risk of exposure, even though we all have probably come to the realization that there's really no way to make it zero. Our risk is not going to be zero. There's going to be some risk to walking out of our house. There's some risk to staying in our house. But the risk to America's position in the world and the world economy, if America doesn't go back to work, could change the dynamics of the globe in a way that we couldn't very easily get it back. And that's why we have two great guests on today to not just talk about the economics, but what's China's plan? We can go back and forth on whether we talk to KT McFarlane, and we can go back and forth on what China knew when it knew it, why didn't it tell the world what was going on in the Wuhan labs. But now you have this other question, which is it happened. And the world kind of shut down, and America kind of shut down, at least most of America. What are they doing to try to take advantage of that situation? And will we have more of these situations in the future? As far as the American Conservative Union is concerned, we believe that we should, in a responsible way that protects people's health and safety, reopen the economy as fast as we can, let individuals decide if they're ready to go back to work. I think millions and millions and millions of Americans want to. And so we support the president in his desire to lean in and get the economy moving. Once the economy is open, we think the next step is going to be to take the safeguards to keep it open. What you hear from a lot of progressives is we should stay shut down as long as possible during this outbreak. And they're already saying they want to shut down again when the weather turns cold in the fall and the winter. The consequences of that for our country, we have to balance our health concerns with the fact that that could change America for the rest of our lives. Certainly until people of my age, people in their 40s and 50s, could be a decade before we get back to really being the largest actor in the world's economy. And of course, our economy is only part of what makes America great. The other part of what makes America great is our values and our constitutional order.
Well,
and
Matt,
we're going to talk about that today, too.
You're a great admirer, as are all conservatives, of Ronald Reagan. We just had KT on with her inspirational message about sacrifice on Monday, and the notion that peace through strength only happens with a robust economy. You can't achieve American strength and American greatness if that economy, that economic engine, is not running on full blast. I'd like to welcome our viewers today on Facebook. We're expanding our audience on Facebook. To those of you who are watching, thank you so much. A lot of the feedback that we've been receiving, Matt Schlapp, has been positive on our CPAC Live programming because it helps us cut through all of the noise and the coverage that a lot of people are seeing that is really having the effect of confusing them. And it brings us great pleasure to bring on two gentlemen whose ability to cut through that noise is admirable. First, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, and of course, former Acting Attorney General of the United States, Matt Whitaker. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on CPAC Live.
Great to join you.
Okay, so we're going to attempt to, in this digital format, viral format, online format, recreate these great conversations you both have been a part of, and Ian, you as well, at our various CPAC conferences. Because of what we're facing with Chinese corona, we can't be in your community. As Ian said, we planned on doing CPAC Exile in sunny Miami, Florida, where all of my wife Mercy's family lives. And we were going to have some fun, have a few parties, and have a very serious conversation about what's going on in our hemisphere with authoritarian governments, for instance, in Venezuela, in Cuba, and how they collude with China and other totalitarian regimes, and what that means for individual freedom. But now we're coming at you on your computer screens, on your phones, on your televisions, to talk about totalitarian regimes in a different context. Obviously, Chinese corona has hit the world. All of our lives have changed. And I want to start with you, Brendan. As we're all learning about technology, through the help of Comcast, I got 1 gig of Wi-Fi ability put in my house, and we're using every aspect of that as we have 5 kids going to school, and and Mercy and I are on our calls and everything else. But technologically, there's some big global questions that impact China as well.
Yeah, Matt, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, from day one in 2017, as we exited the Obama-Biden administration, President Trump was clear. We need to fundamentally change our relationship with communist China. And I think the wisdom of that call now in hindsight has never been more clear. Because frankly, our prior approach was really weak and timid. And that's not a knock on one administration or even one political party. It was bipartisan. But we're finally showing the strength that's needed to compete with communist China. And to your point, we see that on the trade front, and we see that where I work at the FCC. We've taken action to prohibit subsidized Huawei gear from going into U.S. telecom networks based on security threats. We have prohibited China Mobile, one of the largest wireless providers in the world that's ultimately owned by the communist regime, from entering the U.S. market based on security concerns. And where General Whitaker used to work, Department of Justice, just this month, they recommended that the FCC revoke the authority of China Telecom, which currently interconnects with our network, and therefore can take traffic and potentially reroute traffic. And they've recommended that we revoke that authority. I've welcomed that recommendation, and we are now pursuing a show cause order, asking them to let us know why should you still stay in our network, and we'll give them a chance to make their case. But we're showing strength that frankly was long overdue.
So President Trump's reordering of how we handle things like the internet and who manages it, and these global questions of the backbone for technology and what's in the guts of it. The Trump administration's approach, 180 degrees different from what Obama and Biden did, and you would say it was the right way to do it.
Absolutely, not just Obama, Biden, but obviously even going back to the Bush years, where we let a lot of these companies into the networks. And look, our relationship has changed a little bit since then, but the events of the last few weeks really underscore the wisdom of the fundamental shift in relationship and posture that this administration has taken to communist China. Because look, I think it used to be that people had to page through dusty foreign policy journals to understand the implications and the consequences of the communist regime. Not so anymore. It is spilled outside of the pages of those journals to people's kitchen tables. Every single American is impacted right now because of the brutality of the communist regime. They're either out of work,
right,
their kids are out of school, all because the brutality and authoritarianism failed to contain COVID-19 and in fact exacerbated the spread of it. So more than ever before, Americans are feeling in a very visceral way the dangers that come from the communist regime and why we are right to take a much tougher stance.
So you've done a couple of really important things in those two answers, but one of them is you reminded me that you are Commissioner Carr. So if I get too informal here, I apologize. And it is General Whitaker, which is really hard for me to say because just so used to calling him something else. But anyway, General Whitaker, great to have
Hey, you too.
Okay. Well, I saw you in front of Democrats a couple times in your hearings, and you did respond to interesting things. General, you heard what Brennan said about what China is doing technologically. Do you disagree with anything he said, and what else are we not thinking of that we should think about?
No, I tell you, the commissioner is spot on. This is an issue that both as chief of staff and as acting attorney general I took very seriously. You might remember I was the one as the attorney general that arrested the CFO of Huawei,
right,
in Canada. And so I mean, we've taken extraordinary enforcement efforts from a criminal standpoint against Chinese interests. But I want to add on to something that he said, and that is that both in the case of this routing of China Telecom's traffic and in the use of Huawei backbone technology, the concern is that the Chinese will be spying on American phone calls, emails, and internet traffic. And this is not a hypothetical. This is not what if they could do. This is something if you think about what is going on in China, their surveillance, they have more surveillance cameras than any other country. They're using facial recognition, AI software. They could easily deploy that on data and voice traffic. And so, I mean, what the commissioner is addressing at the FCC is a big challenge of our time. And I want to dovetail that on the idea of CPAC exile, because I was looking forward to going to Miami as well, because if we think about what China has done and what they plan to do, this is not they plan to do something this year. They have a 10, 25, 100-year plan to dominate every aspect of the globe. And how is that manifested? Not only in these technology issues, including 5G, which the commissioner has been working very hard on, and I admire him for that work. It's also if you think about the Belt and Road Initiative that they have employed, which they for the how long have they been selling us cheap goods? The trade deficit was so large with China, which means they were collecting American assets through treasury bills and the like, and they're not doing it because they're coupon cutting investors. They're deploying that capital in the Belt and Road Initiative to finance assets around the world, including South America and Central America. And if you think about the Monroe Doctrine and what that said, which was no other foreign power will come into our hemisphere, and China through this Belt and Road Initiative is doing exactly that. And I have along with others, including Gordon Chang, Michael Pillsbury, and others, so many voices, but we have to listen to these voices which are saying the Chinese are going to eat our lunch. And this is where President Trump has been spot on, not only with his campaign to make America first and to shine a light on Chinese behavior, but to also to remember that we cannot grow fat and happy as the only superpower, because China is on the rise and they want to compete. And that means all sorts of things. That means as a reserve currency. That means as a global market maker and everything, Matt. So I mean, this conversation, we can go far afield, and I love talking about these issues, but I want to continue to say the Chinese are trying to beat us on every front, and it is a global competition. And if we don't wake up and compete on every front, then we are going to be looking at a world where we are not the dominant superpower and not reaping the benefits of all of those concepts.
So the Trump administration, through every aspect of the big federal government that, at least on the executive branch, he sits atop of. You have the Federal Communications Commission, you have the Department of Justice. We now can see the Department of Health and Human Services and these other departments all focused on being very critical and scrutinizing what in the past we just allowed China to get away with. And now what do we have to do to reorient what America's posture is? So back to you, Commissioner Carr, and Matt Whitaker, feel free to jump on this as well. Dan Schneider and I were talking about all we're finding out about the World Health Organization, how there was this informal power that China seemed to have over the WHO, to the point where the WHO is spitting out Chinese propaganda about how they're the responsible actor with the Wuhan labs and the Chinese corona. I mean, outrageous, the opposite of the truth. Actually, that's called lie. And that's being paid for by the communists in China. And if they're able to infiltrate the WHO, what does it mean on the international bodies? There was a lot of talk about whether or not, I remember Ted Cruz leading the way, should the internet go to an international body to be governed? Because once that happens, the bad actors like China will find a way to get a leg up on the freedom-loving countries. Do we have to be worried about these international regulators when it comes to our technology backbone and China's desire to take it over?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is another one where this administration was ahead of the curve in seeing the threats and potential threats that could arise or be exacerbated by these type of multinational organizations. The WHO has lost all credibility through the last 4 or 5 weeks, and they have some serious questions to answer. At the end of 2019, in fact, the last day in 2019, the lead epidemiologist on COVID at the WHO saw evidence, and she said that she immediately had the instinct that this was human-to-human transmission. Yet 2 weeks later, after additional evidence to support that initial conclusion, the WHO was pushing out communist China propaganda, saying there's no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission. That exacerbated the spread. And so the ability of the communist regime to use the WHO simply as a mouthpiece for its propaganda is very, very troubling. And I think they need to answer a lot of questions.
So let's talk about these scientists and these people that we're trying. In this country, we take for granted we have the right to raise our hand in the public square and criticize our government, or say that somebody's making a mistake that could cause a health problem, even if it's a smaller magnitude than what we're facing today. Matt Whitaker, we don't know where some of these scientists are. In a regime like in China, you raise your hand, you can get your hand cut off, or even worse. So the current Attorney General, is taking steps to make sure that America can actually responsibly do what's right for its people by knowing when these outbreaks occur. But also, we've got to make sure inside our own country that we have a constitutional order even in a time like this.
Yeah, we do. I want to address both those questions because they're so important. First of all, we cannot trust anything that the Chinese are saying, and anything that is being reported that the Chinese government has said, whether that's the numbers of infections, the number of deaths, the sort of everything that they've done and to address this cannot be believed. And any news outlet that doesn't put a big asterisk and say this is Chinese Communist Party propaganda and can't be verified is complicit in
and
that.
Matt, that also means the numbers coming out of the WHO. I don't think they're credible.
Yeah. No, you're right. And again, I want to on that front, I want to say that it's not just the WHO. The Chinese have tried to take over Interpol, which is the big international police organization that's used to track down fugitives and prevent travel from bad actors. They for a while they had the president of Interpol and so the Chinese are clearly I'm mentioning all these examples while we are not paying attention and are focused on our little internecine battles, we are seeing the Chinese worldwide try to take over these organizations that kind of regulate trade, communications, all these kind of things, 5G standards, all these things. The Department of Justice, I think, is to pivot a little bit and talk about something else that's on my mind. That is, we have our Constitution, which protects us from our government. And remember that we continue to forget that the states created the federal government and not vice versa. And also that our elected officials are accountable and responsible to us. And our Constitution protects our God-given rights of liberty, property. And so I really want to remind the Americans, and I'm so glad that Bill Barr and the Department of Justice, including the U.S. attorneys, are focusing on protecting our civil liberties. There is no exception for pandemics to our constitutional rights, and we need to remember that. And while I'm not suggesting that we should go out and be foolish or do things that infect everybody, we need to remember that our constitutional rights have no exceptions. And so we need to really focus on, and I know the Department of Justice is focusing on, government overreach, where our civil liberties are being invaded.
Yeah, that's right. I think those are really important questions, especially as we move to the next stage of this, which is what Governor Abbott's doing in Texas, what is happening in Georgia, what's happening it seems to be starting in these southern states, but mostly Republican governors saying, hey, look, that we can open up more of the economy in a responsible and safe way. And as we do this, it's inevitable that there will be people that try to turn it into politics and say, oh, these governors are reducing our ability to be healthy and to be safe. And there's going to be a clash there. And in that clash, there has to be sane thinking and constitutional order. And in saying that, I don't mean so much by order, by law and order. I mean good American people who have a decent feeling towards their neighbor, taking responsible steps, which includes going back to work.
Yeah, Matt, I just, this economic situation we find ourselves in, and you remember how people were criticized for saying, let's make sure that the solution isn't worse than the problem, that the disease and the cure have some relationship. I mean, there are many things, again, the advice from the professionals, the experts, of saying, keep more than 6 feet apart, wear a mask when you can't, wash your hands off, and all those kind of things. Those can be implemented, and we can go out of our house. We don't have to be locked inside of our houses, and ordering DoorDash and Uber Eats all the time. We can go out, we can go to a restaurant, we can maintain our distance. Everybody can practice the safest hygiene. And, to some extent, since we don't know what we don't know, I think, the American people, we're going to have to, sort of go at this in a methodic way. Right. Every location, every city, every state is different. And this is why we elect these people. And, whether they're Republican governors or Democrat governors, Republican mayors, Democrat mayors, whomever it is, people that run our school districts, they're going to have to take the best knowledge and advice and implement that. And then, obviously, in our system, they're held accountable to that. That's the thing that contrasts the Chinese. There's no accountability for Xi Jinping. He's emperor for life. And so,
I like to call him Winnie the Pooh, but you can call him whatever you want, General Whitaker.
That always reminds me of when, Governor Vilsack, the former governor of Iowa, and then Secretary of Agriculture, dressed up as Winnie the Pooh for a book thing, and he never lived that picture down. And so,
well, when your book comes out, Matt Whitaker, don't do that, okay?
No funny hats. I believe what Fred Thompson said. No funny hats, no costumes.
Hey, Ian, I know we might have some questions from our CPAC community, so feel free to jump in if that's the case. But I also, if you don't jump in, Ian, I'm going to jump in. But the other question I have for Brendan Carr is, as we kind of bring this conversation to a bit of a close here, I have two questions for you. Number one, we're doing so many of these things, Zoom, this is Big Marker, web calls, all these, everyone has their technology of choice, which is one of the great things about when technology is in the hands of the private sector. Guess what? We have innovation. That's why China steals our innovation, right? Because they're not really good at innovating, because communist governments really don't innovate anything except the gulag, which is really just the same thing over and over again. But is our backbone safe? Is our technology safe?
We're working hard and we're making a lot of progress. And that's why these steps that we're taking against Huawei, ZTE, and other entities that may be beholden to the communist regime are being looked at very closely at the FCC, and we're doing a top to bottom review. The networks have been performing extremely well under this stress test of activity that we're seeing from all these video calls. And I think a lot of that was due, in fact, to the 2017 decision we made at the FCC to reverse course on that Obama era Title II net neutrality decision. You may remember, if you're still alive today, after that reversal of Title II, that it was going to be the end of the internet. And far from it. Private sector investment went up, internet speeds went up, the digital divide has narrowed substantially since then, and our networks are outperforming those in other parts of the world that are under the similar amount of stress that we're now seeing. So to your point, getting unnecessary government work, overreach out of the way, letting the private sector invest and innovate, that's the right path for us, and we're going to keep heading in that direction.
For General Whitaker, what's the one takeaway as America will be going back to work here shortly, but yet still dealing with a China on the rise that wants to dominate the globe? Is there any other lesson you think that we need to learn from what we've just gone through over the course of the last several weeks?
Well, I think the thing we need to remember is every example that I can think of is the Chinese trying to destabilize or dominate the United States, whether it's fentanyl production, which was, opioid. Remember, drug overdoses have killed about 70,000 people a year, and the main leader of that is opioids and fentanyl. Whether it's intellectual property theft, which is very important, whether it's, sort of the 5G standards that the commissioner knows very well, or whether it's this Chinese coronavirus. All of these are examples of the Chinese, the American people paying a price for Chinese behavior. And we need to put this all down and think about how many in the last year, how many Americans have the Chinese been responsible for their deaths? At least 50,000+ in this coronavirus, and at least 70,000+, and a large part of that in these drug overdoses and fentanyl and opioids. And so this is the takeaway for me, and this is something that I'm going to continue to talk about, because we need to hold them accountable. And again, we need to rethink our relationship with communist China.
I want to thank you guys both for being with us. Ian, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Commissioner Carr, a lot of activists have been given a lot of joy over the past couple of weeks watching you wrestle on Twitter with officials from the Chinese Communist government. If you're not following Brendan Carr on Twitter, follow him. Brendan Carr, FCC. How much of this was going on prior to the coronavirus pandemic, and how much has the pandemic just sort of accelerated the direction that we were going as far as some of these bots and propagandists and bad actors attempting to influence American public opinion on our social media networks?
Well, look, there's nothing a communist likes less than hearing the truth spoken freely and loudly. I think anyone that has a platform should use that platform to do exactly that. I do think that this pandemic has exacerbated that type of activity. The chief propagandists for communist China have hit overdrive. They are out there every day suggesting directly or indirectly that the U.S. was at fault, that this virus originated in the U.S., that the U.S. has something to hide. And for us to sit back and just take those punches, there's no way that we're doing that. So I think we all need to speak up. And that's why it's so important to say, where this virus started, to put the culpability where it in fact lies, which is in the brutality of the communist regime. Because, let me tell you, they are not stopping their global campaign, both to blame the U.S., and as General Whitaker has so succinctly stated, to use the cover of the pandemic to continue their digital version of Belt and Road, whether it's 5G or otherwise. So I think we all need to be speaking up.
And one last question for you, General Whitaker. You're so strong on constitutional principles. You mentioned AI and the social crediting system that they're employing in China in order to keep down their infection rate. What should our principles be as Americans as we look to reopen society? You're going to see laws about having to wear masks when you go to the grocery store, perhaps the application of technology in the workplace and manufacturing plants as they open up. But it feels like to a lot of conservatives that we may be walking down this road of an American social crediting system. Do you have your vaccination papers? Have you been cleared by the United States government to go and do X, Y, and Z throughout your day? What should our principles be, and what should we fight for as we open up socially?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ian. And I think we cannot get to a place where it is papers, please. But at the same time, we can't be reckless and foolish. And so what we need to do is we need to remember that our constitutional principles, whether that's the freedom to assemble, freedom to exercise our religious beliefs, freedom of speech, and all of those things cannot be infringed by the government without really an extraordinary showing and it be narrowly tailored. And so as we go into this new phase, I think we all need to practice, what has been recommended. Again, the 6 feet of separation, the covering your mouth if you can't maintain 6 feet, the washing your hands frequently, all the kind of things that we're being told are the best way to fight this. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we do not let government maintain these sort of temporary restrictions for the long term. And that's what I think we need to all remember is that, there is a moment where the police powers of especially the states can address real health crises. But at the same time, those have to be limited in scope and duration and have to be narrowly tailored. And we got to make, that's going to be a daily assessment. And, freedom-loving Americans need to make sure, it's patriots. Right. It's people that are willing to defend the Constitution in relationship to, making sure that the state, the government doesn't lock in and maintain these restrictions when they're unnecessary.
So
go ahead.
Picking up on that, one disturbing trend I saw was you had a handful of governors that supposedly were directing or telling Facebook to take down posts that were advocating protests of those very same state governments. And look, these platforms have a lot of leeway on the decisions they make. I've been clear about that, but I've also been clear about what I think we should embrace, which is more speech, not less. But if it's true that a state government is leaning on this private platform to shut down speech that state government doesn't like, that crosses the line into the First Amendment. That's disturbing. I think that's why General Whitaker is right. We all have to be responsible. We all have to be reasonable, but we can't be crossing and touching these third rails of constitutional protections.
Look, we all know it's American values of freedom and the issues that we've been leading on for 200 years plus that will get us through these dark periods of time. When you have governors literally acting like Chinese censors and trying to get social media to pick a political side to help the politics of, in that case, a blue state governor or governor that comes from the Democratic Party, that is a big problem. It would be as big a problem if it was happening on the Republican side. The one thing I know that America is still vigorously accepting the First Amendment is how I get trashed on Twitter so constantly. So I know the First Amendment is alive. And as we come to a conclusion in this conversation, I want to say to Brennan Carr, your beard looks great. And are you concerned that it seems like Matt Whitaker can't grow a beard?
I think he's looking pretty good. So.
Oh, you're such a diplomat.
I'm doing the best with what I got.
Well, in Iowa, it's just the way it is. Ian, we got a whole bunch of interesting things to talk about. We want to thank our guests for being with us. And I don't know how to end this, so I'm just going to end it like that.
And we'll be right back.
I would like to talk with you this evening about what we can do together to make tomorrow's America happy and prosperous at home, strong and respected abroad, and at peace in the world. We will restore the freedom of all men and women to excel and to create. We will unleash the energy and genius of the American people, traits which have never failed us. We can create the incentives which take advantage of the genius of our economic system.
There is news tonight of another threat to America's economy and security: cyber attacks.
China is stealing intellectual property by hacking into computer networks of U.S. companies.
Chinese hackers are also blamed for attacks on large information systems, including Google's networks.
China unleashing its full spy power on American power grids and the wealth of American manufacturing.
China striking at the heart of our economy. Iconic American companies like Ford and Google, the Pentagon too.
Reliable estimates put the loss at more than $100 billion a year.
And we're back, folks, to our final segment of Wednesday's CPAC Live. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us on Facebook as we expand our audience. Don't forget, you can reach out to us at cpac@conservative.org if you have questions for some of our guests, for some of our speakers, and if you have topics that you'd like for us to address in future broadcasts. Matt Schlapp, the House is not coming back to Capitol Hill. The Senate is coming back to Capitol Hill. I'm not sure what that means for anybody, how you're going to pass a bill. You got to go back and watch the Schoolhouse Rock episode to see how they're going to deal with this one. But keeping the House or getting the House back and keeping the Senate, these are going to be big priorities over the next 6 months, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you have the question about how they're going to operate as a legislative body, and I think everybody just needs to realize and follow much of what Matt Whitaker talked about, which is, take precautions for your health. But the secondary question is more long-term, which is what's going to happen in November? Who's going to get punished? Who's going to get rewarded? Before the outbreak of Chinese corona, I was thinking the House is very much in play. I think these 31 Democrats in seats that Trump won in 2016 are in a very precarious position after Mueller, Russian collusion, impeachment, Schiff's, crazy antics, and Jerry Nadler's antics, Nancy Pelosi's, bowing down and genuflecting of the squad, and the squad kind of being the informal leader of the House caucus. I continue to think that this is a very volatile political time. I think we're going to see a lot of change come November, and look, I think that could hit some Republican incumbents potentially too, because people are going to start to get crankier and crankier the more they realize the economy's got real challenges, and they might have real challenges with their own jobs. So I continue to think the House is very much in play, Ian, and I'm very worried about the Senate. It's imperative Republicans hold on to the Senate, and I think Dan Schneider, you've joined our conversation. You've walked around and worked around the bowels of the Senate and had important jobs over there. If Donald Trump doesn't have a Republican Senate or a majority who will vote to confirm his nominees, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I know that lots of people understand that it takes 60 votes, more than a majority, a supermajority, to get anything done in the Senate. Similarly, with a minority, Chuck Schumer is able to block all kinds of legislation, nominations. We all understand what a filibuster is notionally. There's a type of filibuster that Schumer has been using to block nominations. The last 4 administrations combined, there have only been about 30 of these kind of filibusters of nominations. Schumer has 10 times that amount, 10 times more many blocking and tackling than the prior 4 administrations combined. 300 of these things.
Yeah, that's a terrible thing. And then we have the ultimate concern from a lot of conservatives are the open positions on courts, and most especially the Supreme Court, where there are no open positions. But we all know that the average age of your average Supreme Court justice is skews very high. And so the likelihood of an outcome or of an opening is incredibly high within the course of the next short period of time, or going into the first year of a second Trump term. If there's not a Republican majority in the Senate, what the Kavanaugh hearings become JV? What's going to happen?
We've got 3 Supreme Court justices who are quite a ways up there in years in terms of the historical norm. We could have up to 3 vacancies easily in the next 4 years. And obviously that is enough to completely flip the court. We've got to make sure that we have somebody in the executive branch who's going to be nominating good constitutional conservatives to the courts at every level. And Trump has been spectacular in that so far.
Dan,
I was just going to say, Ian, I still like beer. And I think one of the great things is Donald Trump has kept his word to conservatives and to Americans and to voters that he was going to simply put people on the court that will follow the Constitution. What a novel idea.
Let me ask both of you guys. Republicans lost the House in 2018, and there are a lot of these freshman Democrats who won in Trump districts or in very close districts, and they made these moderate promises. We're going to help fix Obamacare. It was tremendously appealing to voters in the middle. And now Nancy Pelosi, you got to hand it to her, has all of these rookie freshman Democrats dancing to the squad's tune. Just like Matt said, they have moved so far to the left. Dan, what's it going to take to convince people that you're voting for Nancy Pelosi and the squad's tactic and leadership rather than what a candidate might be saying there on now the virtual stump?
Well, I know that Julie Woods Hill and Grizzly Joe have both been asking this question. People forget the very first vote that all of those freshmen took was to vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. And about 30 of them on their very first vote broke their promise not to vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker.
That's right.
So, what these freshmen said from the very beginning was a lie. And yes, they are dancing to the whip of Nancy Pelosi and AOC, but this is not a surprise. The Democrat Party today is not only not your grandfather's party, it's not also your mother's party. It has become so radicalized. It's a fright for what it means for American freedom in the future.
It's true.
Schlapp, what would you tell candidates who, say in Arizona or in Colorado, who are in blue states that are turning blue, on how to communicate with their voters in this moment of crisis and pandemic between state responses and federal responses? What's the right way to run for those guys who are going to be in tight races?
Well, since my mind is not as agile as it used to be, Ian, I want to first say how great it is to actually be kind of in the same room with you two. It's been a long time, so this is really great. This is fun for me anyway. Cheers. But what I would tell anybody who's running for office right now is much of what has been true in the Trump era of American politics, which is probably don't do what you've been always told to do. And in a moment of crisis and emergency, Americans are actually not that political always, but they're especially so when they actually think the country's facing a real challenge. And this is an interesting challenge because it's not just this Chinese corona and shutting down the economy. It's just questions about China that we just talked about and that we're talking about on every show on purpose. We have some real serious challenges that we have to lead the free world on. And the American people understand, even those that don't want America to be involved in every war and be involved all over the globe in every dispute, they do understand that America has a very special role. And I think candidates that tie into that, which is both an emotion and a principle, I think they'll be rewarded. I actually think the role of the elephant and the donkey is receding over time. We're becoming more independent. We can get our news from independent sources. And candidates that understand that moment, I think, will be rewarded. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump broke every rule that everyone said, if you do these things, you'll never be able to win a race or you'll be at 20% in the approval ratings. And he's kind of broken those rules because What he does, number one, is he is who he is. He knows who he is, and he communicates in a way that seems authentic, and that in polls, it's enduring over time. In other words, he's doing better over time. And I think that you'll see Democrats. One of the things the three of us don't like Bernie Sanders, but he's authentic. He is a Trotskyite or whatever he is, a Marxist, a collectivist. That's what he is. He's with the bad hair and the rumpled clothing. He doesn't try to fake it, and that was considered to be, I'm still shocked, really, that he's not the nominee that Donald Trump's going to face, because he's where their heart and soul is. And I think the squad, at least AOC, she is what she is, a bit of an empty-headed vessel who used to be a barista and doesn't bring a lot of experience to the table. But our American system allows that to happen, especially if your voters are from Brooklyn. It can happen.
When you're a barista, you got two options. You can go be a producer for MSNBC, or you can run for Congress.
Hey, you know what we should have on our show? Let's have Chris Matthews. Let's get him out of retirement. I bet he'd have some interesting things to say about this moment.
I imagine he would. Dan, let me ask you one question before we get out of here. Joe Biden is the nominee for the time being. He has been in the Senate longer than I've been alive. I think often senators have all of these votes, hundreds and thousands of votes, especially as they have long careers, for opposition research people to go through and to cut ads. How bad is Joe Biden's record when people start going through it?
Yeah, on the foreign policy votes, he is just atrocious. And
he's always wrong.
Even in the Obama administration, he was always wrong. Yesterday, Hillary endorsed Joe Biden. And in that endorsement, she alluded to the fact that she rarely agreed with him on foreign policy issues. He's wrong all the time, regardless of where you stand on issues.
Yeah,
it'd be terrible for national security. He's an affable guy. He's a dim bulb. He finished bottom of his class, and he also has a problem with lying. He finished bottom of his law school class, yet he claimed to be the top. He plagiarized. He's just a disaster.
Hey, Dan, was he the first Biden in a generation to go to college or something like that? Is that?
I don't know. But the Bidens have. He's not the first to be sold out to China, though.
No, and the other piece that's interesting about Joe Biden, Ian, is there is so much material. You're right. There's so much. You could really lose yourself in the mediocrity of Joe Biden's political stances and how often he's been wrong. But even if you just fast forward to the present, he can't do what we're doing. He really can't seem to have a conversation and keep a train of thought. I think the charges of sexual impropriety are going to be a serious thing for him to have to contend with, especially in a party that really believes the Me Too moment deserves real attention. And I think the other thing that's very hard for him is that he kind of got the nomination by default. He's much like Hillary. They don't really want him, but they felt in the end they were kind of pushed to go with him because of Team Obama and Team Clinton pushing everybody else out of the race. They clearly wanted Mayor Pete or a woman like Elizabeth Warren or socialists like Bernie Sanders. They got stuck with this old white guy who can't talk without his lips and his foot intermingling at the same time, and going up against Donald Trump, who I think is going to be able to make some mincemeat out of him.
Joe Biden, I think, is what you call an at-risk demographic at this point. Fellas, thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday edition of CPAC Live. Thank you, Dan Schneider, ACU Executive Director. Thanks to Brendan Carr and to Matt Whitaker. And Matt, if you don't tell anybody what's in your coffee cup, I won't tell anybody what's in mine. Thanks so much.
Don't break any FCC rules, Ian.
That's right. No, none of those 7 words. And join us next Friday, or this Friday, the day after tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. for another action-packed edition of CPAC Live. See you then.
Thanks, everyone.